Welcome to the LeaderCast podcast, a weekly deep dive into the stories that transformed our guests into leaders worth following. I'm your host, Joe Boyd. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being a listener. One simple thing you can do to help us out is give a review wherever you listen. Today's guest is Paul Spiers. He is the host and founder of the new P&L podcast, and he helps folks get to a place of understanding life and business is way more about principled leadership than it is about profit and loss. You'll learn a lot of great tidbits here from Paul, including how to lead up when you start to feel like maybe your organization needs to change a little, and also the two things that leaders need to think about before they address their employees. Check it out. Paul Spiers, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you very much. I welcome the invitation.
Very excited to talk to you. I first saw the new P&L. That's the name of your organization, correct?
Yes, it is. Yep. New P&L Principles and Leadership in Business.
It caught my eye because I don't know if you've heard this story before, but I actually have been an entrepreneur and a business person for quite a while now, but I have a degree in theology. And then I took a detour doing comedy. So I had already started my second company before I could read a P&L statement, actually. No one ever taught me how to do that. I've obviously learned through the years. But tell us a little bit of what you mean about when you talk about the new P&L.
Absolutely. So the new P&L, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, came out of a very personal experience I had in business. At that time, I thought there's got to be a better way of doing business than what we had been subjected to, and being a creative at heart, I came up with the idea for the new P&L. So one based on principles and leadership, not just profit and loss. And it's my belief that if you focus your business on principles and leadership, you have an ethical approach to business, a purpose-led approach to business, and your leadership is, again, ethical and has a sound vision and a belief in where that business needs to go, then your business will be in profit and not loss in many ways. So the new P&L has a positive impact on the traditional P&L, if you like.
Well, yeah, so I'd love to get straight to it. Could you tell us a little bit of your career path? And especially I love early on, what were your early sort of, even as a kid maybe, your early ambitions or dreams, and how did that lead you into the career when you first started?
I mean, it's interesting when I look back, because I have a very linear line into doing what I'm doing from when I was a 7-year-old boy, but at the same time I've had a very diverse career. So I came out of school at 15 and worked in photography, became a professional musician, went to university in my mid-20s, somewhat later than many others, came out, got a job in the creative sector, and then became effectively an entrepreneur. So set up my various agencies and consultancies over the years, and had a midlife crisis and set up a surf clothing brand, and enjoyed that for a while as well. So at one level it seems quite diverse, but when I trace it back, the red thread, if you like, that runs through all of those things is the desire for curiosity, for information, for creativity, whether it's music, photography, marketing, the new P&L, whatever it happens to be. When I was 7 years old, we didn't have a lot of books in the house when I was a kid, but when I was 7 years old, I won an encyclopedia in a raffle. And Mum said I just devoured that book for the next 2 years. You know, all the rest of my brothers and sisters would be out playing. I'd be on the lounge floor or lying on the ground outside, just reading that book back to front. And in my early 50s now, I can still draw as I said earlier, a straight line back to that boy and his desire for curiosity and information and understanding and learning. And that's what facilitates the new P&L as a podcast and as an institute and a consultancy, is that same desire for curiosity and a passion to learn and to drive myself forward and to drive, those immediately around me forward as a result. So that's a potted summary of me and my career.
You're not the first person that's actually talked about getting an encyclopedia when you were a kid.
Really?
And it was true with me too. I think it was Encyclopedia Britannica. It was like a whole set. Folks our age. I'm 49. So, we were the last generation pre-internet to like be kids without the internet, it was just fascinating that you could, it makes it sound so incredibly ancient, but that you could just learn about things that no one else even cared about just by looking them up. Would you would you classify yourself as like, I don't know, this might not even be a fair term, but like a classic creative sort of temperament? Do you consider yourself kind of a creative soul?
I do consider myself a creative soul, but I don't know whether that's different from a creative temperament. I have fought most of my professional career to turn ideas into action. You have 100
Yeah.
ideas a day, but ideas without action are just delusion in an entrepreneurial sense. Um, so that for me, it would be great to have a business partner that sort of complements that, because I think there's some wonderful partnerships in business, and generally they're focused around one having great ideation, one having great delivery. So part of my learning journey in life is to focus, convert ideas into action, and I've done that a few times with various entrepreneurial ventures. The new P&L certainly has been an idea converted into action, but probably in that sense, yes, a more traditional creative character.
So are you saying that you normally need someone alongside of you to fill in the gaps? Is that when you say a partner or a?
Yeah, I think it's always important to build a team around you with complementary skills, not necessarily a business partner, but I think too many entrepreneurs with great ideas go into business, or leaders go into business and believe that they do, or they should have all of the answers, whereas in fact you have a specific skill set, and part of the benefit to being a more self-aware and more successful leader is to recognize where those gaps in your skill sets and abilities are, and who you can bring in to help fill those.
Yeah. I saw a couple of versions of your bio, and there's a line in there, I don't have it memorized, about basically something went wrong, right? Something in your life didn't go the way you wanted, and there's always the all is lost moment in any great movie where the hero loses everything. My hunch is you have a story like that. So as much as you're willing to tell, what was that moment in your life when that you reference in your bio as kind of life-changing moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a marketing and communications agency, my latest one, if you like, in the early 2000s, successful agency. We were subjected at the time, as I alluded to earlier, to a series of very unethical actions from a client. It took the agency to its knees. It took me to my knees personally. But out of the embers of that, as I said, came an idea for a new P&L. I didn't know what that looked like at the time. I just knew that there was strength in that idea. There was something in that idea that I had to hold on to. And like many ideas, it sat at the back of my mind while I rebuilt things professionally and personally. But then 3 years ago, the idea of a new P&L and a podcast initially merged together. I had the idea to develop that podcast, see whether it would resonate, whether people understood what a new P&L would look like, whether it would resonate with the world. And that was October 2019. We then came into COVID. Mm-hmm. There was a refocus on people's purpose and what business looks like and how it should serve and what it should serve for, what its reason is. So I think we fell slightly on the right side of history in terms of what we were trying to do with the new P&L and the conversations we were trying to have.
Yeah.
3 years later, we're a very successful podcast and institute as well, a new P&L Institute. So something really, really great and powerful came from that moment. But, lots of these things do, don't they? They come from moments where you think things can't get any worse. But it's in that time that you find that innovation, that creativity, and that ingenuity and that motivation to create something more beautiful out of the embers, if you like.
Yeah. I want to ask just one follow-up question about that specific time, because one of the things I try to remember is folks listening to this podcast are, LeaderCast is for leaders all around the world, all different kinds of leaders. So, some folks leading a small team, a small business, other folks leading hundreds of people, school teachers, policemen, all sorts of people listen to this.
Yeah.
And there are for sure some people today listening in their car at that moment where they realize, I just got my knees cut out from under me. I'm going to have to start over, do something. It's very inspiring to hear lots of folks say, look, it gets better. Like it actually was a good thing looking back on it. But practically, what would you want to tell someone, or what did you need to hear in that moment to sort of begin the work of rebuilding, in essence?
One piece of advice I got at the time, and it was from my my father, who's passed away since, but he was I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand originally. He was a very stoic old tradesman with very, very little emotion. But I told him about what happened and what had happened to the business in particular. And he said, well, if you're not dead, it's not over. And although it's quite a hard thing to listen to, it's true because it kind of set me on the journey to rebuilding. And I guess the piece of advice today, for what it's worth to anyone listening, as you highlighted, is the things won't change tomorrow. I'm still building this business now and we're 7, 8, 9 years on. Things won't change tomorrow, but something will change tomorrow. One thing will change if you focus on it consciously and become aware of what that needs to change and commit to it and keep building on those things. And it is just those little, cliched as it sounds, it is those little steps. You can't go from being beaten down to transformation in a week. It takes time, but if you just focus on building one thing on top of the other and just keep recognizing that, like all entrepreneurs often do, that tomorrow is a better day. You've got to keep believing, however much it might not seem it in that moment, you've got to believe in a better tomorrow. Otherwise, there's no point in being an entrepreneur if you can't see a vision for a better tomorrow than there is today.
Yeah, yeah. That's really good. It makes me think, I hadn't thought of it this way. There is a sense of freedom that sometimes comes I'll use the word failure, but there's a sense of freedom that comes when you feel like you've lost everything that can open your eyes up to the things that were there all along that you didn't realize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, with the new P&L, I feel like I've finally found, I described it to someone as the other day, for most of my professional career, I felt I was standing in the right field, but looking the wrong way. And with the new P&L, I turned around and I realized, to use a rugby analogy, I was supposed to be running for the other try line. But all my life I'd been standing looking at the other one. So I was in the right place creatively, but I'd been looking the wrong way. And the new P&L gave me that opportunity. And had I not had the situation that occurred, I may have still been happy, but I wouldn't have ever been satisfied. Whereas now I feel I am both. I'm striving for more, but I believe totally in what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. It doesn't mean it's not hard work. It's incredibly hard work. But I have total purpose, total belief, and total passion in this. And that wouldn't have happened without that moment.
I hesitate to maybe use it's almost like religious language, but is there sort of a conversion that has to take place for folks that you work with in terms of what you just talked about? Because kind of turning around the other way, walking the other direction is very sort of classical, like conversion kind of imagery. Do you find yourself actually dealing with folks that are kind of all dollars and cents and trying to show them that there's another way? Is that a lot of what you do?
I guess it's less about a conversion and more about creating a level of self-awareness that enables you to take a step back and to consciously look at your leadership and your approach and the way you run your business and what all of those dots are that joint leadership and business culture and business operations and attitude and employees and all of those other elements of a business. And one thing I think I'm reasonably good at is, and perhaps that's the creativity, is being able to take an objective step back and look at the businesses that we work with and see the dots that are there and apparent to me that perhaps they aren't to a leader because you're too close to it. And, over time, anyone in any natural sense of business or your personal life, you think you expand in terms of your awareness and knowledge, but often you funnel, often your thinking and your awareness narrows rather than naturally expands. You have to be very, very consciously committed to expanding curiosity, knowledge, and so on. You get into a niche, you know what you're good at, it becomes second nature by virtue of all of those things. It narrows. So I think it's less of a conversion and more about really prompting a conscious commitment and self-awareness as to what needs to change and how it can change.
I guess a pretty broad but big question is how do you help folks do that? What sends people on that journey to be willing to do that?
There's a challenging element right at the beginning because we want to and we need to, and the most important businesses to work with in this regard are those who recognize, firstly, that change needs to come. Because it's very difficult to work on a transformational leadership program with someone who has a lack of self-awareness because they already believe they're transformed. They already believe they're a great leader.
Yeah.
So there has to be a level of humility within a leader who recognizes they may have some of the answers, but recognizes also that there are many answers that they don't have. So it's finding that leader who knows that they need to do something, but doesn't quite know what it is and needs help to achieve that.
I don't, I told you I'm a religion major. I don't always bring it back to that, but that's in every classic religion is this sort of, they talk about soil. Your soil has to be ready for change, right? And so sort of spending the time looking for that. There's one thing I saw that you wrote about that caught my eye, which is you had a term for it. I'll let you say what it is because I don't want to mess it up. But the sort of the belief statements, mission statements, value statements that all businesses have, that it's easy to, I feel like sometimes we can create those, put them on a shelf, never think about them again. You talk about that some, don't you?
I do. I mean, I call them vinyl values.
That's it. Yeah.
So those are the values that are often printed on vinyl. And they sit behind a reception wall, or they sit in a boardroom, or wherever it happens to be in the office, and they are supposed to espouse or represent all of the values that are inherent, or the vision that's inherent in that company. What it often ends up being is a substitute for rather than a demonstration of those values. So the company's commitment to them is about as thin as the vinyl they're printed on. So part of my focus is to get businesses back to that purpose that formed the essence of that business when it began. You know, no one, or very few, I hope, people wake up on a Saturday morning and think, I've got nothing better to do, I'll start a business.
Right.
You know, people start because they have a purpose. They want to make a change in the world, make an impact, create a new product, see a gap in the market, create a niche, or whatever it happens to be. And then over time, perhaps as the founder becomes distracted or focused on other things, or new people come into the business, everything filters down to that little bottom right-hand corner of the Excel sheet, which is, how do we grow by 5% in the next year? Mm-hmm. And in that question and that asking of that process about how do we grow by 5%, it becomes more and more about the product and less about the reason behind it. And that stifles innovation, it stifles growth in the business because it becomes very one-dimensional. It all becomes that small little box on the bottom right-hand side. So what we try to do is to test people's assumptions and their statements on the vision that they have. So we go into a business, run a health check. We call it the mantra principle. It's our proprietary framework that we have. But we ask them for their vision and their values. And, you know, people are very proud about demonstrating them or articulating them to us. But then we ask for the evidence of those values being delivered in that business. Where do we see it in the conversations and the communication and the way the product's developed and the way you relate with customers and with employees and other stakeholders and the way you position your brand? All of those things at the veneer, at the front end, but also those things that drive the back end of that business, that deep inset culture. And that often catches some leaders because they can articulate it, they can demonstrate it in their own way of delivering the business, but they can't see how it's delivered across the business. And that's where the opportunity is, I think, to re-engage purpose in that business.
I thought of two different follow-ups to that. I'll try to remember the second one. We'll go to the first one because I'm imagining, we've talked a lot about entrepreneurs, and not everyone who listens to this is an entrepreneur. We're all just leaders in various ways, but there's always an entrepreneurial thing about leadership, even if you're not. But I'm imagining a leader, say a leader of a small business or a division of a business, who hears you say that and just kind of knows the second you say it that I'm doing that. I couldn't even tell you our 8 values. They might say, we wrote them. I don't know what they are. Apart from, we'll talk about this at the end. I'm sure folks can use you as a consultant. Apart from hiring you, and maybe some of them will. But what do you do then? What do you do in that moment where you're like that realization of, I think it's all sort of just, smoke and mirrors. These aren't really our values, probably.
Make a plan.
Yeah.
Start by making a plan, looking at what those 8 values are in your example, and work out where you think they are being delivered in the business now, where you think the holes are in terms of their delivery, why you think those holes exist. So is it because you are not communicating properly? Is it because the processes aren't in place to deliver it? Is it because there's a misunderstanding between innovation and product development teams and the sales teams? Do the sales teams not understand what the purpose of the product is? They're just selling on margin, not on benefit or the beauty of that product. Try to understand where those holes are. Try to understand why they exist as holes, and then create a plan to start slowly, step by step, as I alluded to earlier, reintroducing the vision and the values and the purpose into that business. And don't expect it to change overnight. This could take 6 or 12 months to change. Seeding a culture and re-engaging a culture takes time. And I think one other piece of advice I would offer is, when you have a company meeting or an all hands meeting or a vision meeting or whatever it happens to be, however you describe it, and a mistake that I feel leaders often make is, we have a new vision or we have a new set of values or we're introducing a new product or whatever the case may be, and we get up in front of our employees and we deliver this 10, 15, 20-minute dialogue or monologue, usually it is.
Yeah.
And we believe that everyone gets it because we get it. There's two issues with that, I think, that leaders don't think about enough. One is that no employee that you're speaking to comes to that meeting with an objective point of view. They come to it with the 5 CEOs before who have made grand promises, delivered grand visions, offered strategic values, and then it all just whittled away after 3 months or 6 months. So you've got to get them to 0 before you get them engaged and into the positive in terms of your vision. The other is that everyone that you're delivering to over that 10 or 15 minutes has not been sitting in the boardroom for the last 3 months designing these values, designing this vision. There's no context to the conversation you're having. So you've got to, it's another old cliche, but you've got to put yourself in their shoes. They're coming at it with a negative perspective, not because of what you're saying, but because of what they've heard before. And they're coming to it without context. If leaders could engage and build into their presentations those two considerations, I think there would be a much greater embrace of the vision and the purpose and the direction of the business, because it's contextually and historically understood.
That's kind of gold right there. I think hopefully folks made it this far into the podcast listening to us, because that's.
Hopefully I didn't put them to sleep.
That is. I've seen myself do the opposite so many times in my life, and a lesson learned, right? And particularly for my personality, I'm not afraid to go through a hard decision-making process, but I hate reliving it. Like once it's done, that's sort of the joy of having done it, right? But a leader has to relive it. You have to constantly relive it as you lead other people through it. The olden days, you could just say, I made this decision, don't worry about it, maybe. But people need to be sort of shepherded through all that. So that's great. My other follow-up was, as you're talking about it all sort of coming down to the metrics or the right-hand corner, this is probably a little harder question than if the leader themselves is sort of convicted around that. But most folks in our community are leading people and also have a leader that they're following.
Yes.
So what do you do when you start to feel that before the person leading you does, or you're in an organization where you kind of feel like this is something you feel like should be addressed? How do you lead up, in essence? What's the best practice there?
So 2 things I would say. One is, and it does depend on every individual situation, clearly, but the 2 strongest things to do is build a business case for whatever you're trying to deliver to push upwards. Everything's got to ultimately rely. I'm not an idealist when it comes to leadership or transformational leadership. I'm a pragmatist. It's got to serve the purpose. A new P&L has to serve the old P of the old P&L. Mm. It's got to serve profitability. There's nothing wrong with profit as a concept. It's how you earn it and what you do with it. We all have to earn profit as a business to survive. So build the business case for what you're about to present, and then book that time and have an open and honest but authoritative, based on the evidence, conversation with your leader. And certainly in my experience, most leaders, because most leaders are just decent human beings who are often alienated and put in their own challenges and have their own insecurities and everything else. We're all just human. Very few of us are true autocratic or dictatorial leaders in business. Most of that aggression or frustration comes from a sense of insecurity, I think, with senior leaders sometimes.
Yeah.
But have that open and honest conversation with that leader. Book the time that's needed to have that conversation so you can have you're not trying to race through everything and skip the context and the detail again. Build the business case for it and have that open dialogue with that leader. Demonstrate why there's a benefit. So a clear red thread to give as an example would be if you're trying to reintegrate purpose into the business. What does that look like in terms of a culture? There's plenty of research out there to demonstrate the power of demonstrable purpose on a company's culture. And if a company's culture is more loyal, more engaged, then retention increases. And if retention increases, then all of those fees, I think there's a 30% margin on or cost to bring in a new person on in that first year. So whatever their salary is, 30% on top is the cost to get them up to speed, to get them trained, to get them understanding the business, buying into that business. If you've got a purpose-led culture that is more engaged and more loyal, and you increase retention or retain retention as a result, you reduce your recruitment costs by X, Y, or Z, whatever it happens to be. So look for that evidence that's out there. There is so much research out there to back the case for whatever you're trying to make in that conversation, if you're trying to lead upwards, if you like.
That's great. That's great stuff. We're running out of time. It's been awesome chatting with you. If folks want to get in touch with you or learn more about the new P&L, where should they go?
So there's a few places you can go to, principlesandleadership.com. That's the main website there. We've got the podcast and the Institute on there. We're running a transactional to transformational leadership program at the moment, which is an 8-week, 1.5 hours a week program. Your listeners, I'd like to offer a special 20% off discount for any of your listeners who want to sign up to that. And they can just email me at paul@principlesandleadership.com. Just put Leadercast in the subject header. And then in terms of the new P&L podcast, any of the major streaming platforms, just type in the new P&L, Principles and Leadership in Business, and you'll find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, or any of the others.
That's awesome, Paul. Thanks for offering that discount. We'll put it in the underneath our podcast write-up so folks can easily access that. And really appreciate getting to know you. And we'll get you over here in the U.S. at some point. And thanks for being part of the LeaderCast community. I'm sure we'll circle back around and really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been great to meet you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll see you next time.